Death. The action or fact of dying or being killed. The end of the life of a person or organism. He had been depressed since the death of his father. The state of being dead. Even in death, she was beautiful. The permanent ending of vital processes in a cell or tissue. The personification of the power that destroys life, often represented in art and literature as a skeleton or an old man holding a scythe. The destruction or permanent end of something, the death of her hopes, a damaging or destructive state of affairs. To be driven to a dance by one's father would be social death. To death, used of a particular action or process that results in someone's death. He was stabbed to death, used to emphasize the extreme nature of a specific action, feeling, or state of mind. I'm sick to death of you. What is the correct definition of death? Death, the total cessation of life processes that eventually occurs in all living organisms. What are the three definitions of death? However, these and other practical problems in determining higher brain death do not prevent us from pragmatically defining death. In virtually every case, death may be sufficiently determined by what I shall call the death criteria trifecta, or cardiopulmonary, total brain, and higher brain criteria. What is the meaning of at the death? Involved in or present at the end, especially a disastrous end, but sometimes merely the climax of an important event. For example, he had a hand in their breakup, but he didn't want to be in at the death. Or they've done really well this year, and we want to be in at the kill. What is death philosophically? The philosophy of death attempts to determine what it is for people and other living things to die, how and the extent to which death and posthumous events benefit or harm those who die, and the morality of killing. The issues that arise might loosely be classified as metaphysical, prudential, and moral. Is death a male or female? Male. Death is most often personified in male form, although in certain cultures death is perceived as female. For instance, Marzana in Slavic mythology or Santa Muerte in Mexico. Death is also portrayed as one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Why is death irreversible? Without a blood supply, your brain cells start dying off rapidly in around 6 minutes. Then there's an irreversible loss of all neurological function in the brain and brainstem. No sign of life, no coming back. Sign the death certificate. What are the seven types of death? Classifications are natural, accident, suicide, homicide, undetermined, and pending. Only medical examiners and coroners may use all of the manners of death. Other certifiers must use natural or refer the death to the medical examiner. What happens after death? Your heart stops beating, your brain stops. Other vital organs, including your kidneys and liver, stop. All your body systems powered by these organs shut down too, so that they're no longer capable of carrying on the ongoing processes understood as simply living. What is the meaning of death in Bible? What happened on the day Adam and Eve sinned? They came under the judgment and the condemnation of God, and that is what death is in the Bible. Why death is nothing to fear. The act of dying, then and being dead, is nothing to reasonably worry about, because just like before we were born, there is no part of our consciousness that exists to experience it. What is death in nihilism? The most classic figure of nihilism is the statement that everything is devalued, desymbolized, and untenable in the face of death. It is an equalization of the totality of everything that could be valued, faced with the radical ontological finitude that death represents. Why do people fear death? Humans also fear death because they view death as an annihilation of their person, a radical personal transformation, a threat to the meaningfulness of life, and a threat to the completion of life projects. Is death biological? Biological death involves understanding intrinsic or real changes to the material whatness of existence, whereas social death involves an understanding of narrative change of who we are. Biological and social death depend on an existence condition. Who is the god of death? Thanatos. In ancient Greek religion and mythology, the personification of death. Thanatos was the son of Nyx, the goddess of night, and the brother of Hypnos, the god of sleep. He appeared to humans to carry them off to the underworld when the time allotted to them by the fates had expired. Does death change a person? The death of a loved one who was a meaningful part of your life can absolutely lead to significant shifts in your personality, which may include changes in your thought processes, priorities, motivating factors, and emotional patterns. What are the five signs of death? The signs that someone has died are there is no breathing or heartbeat, they cannot be woken up, their skin is pale and waxy, their eyelids might be half open, their pupils are fixed, their mouth may fall open. Do you ever recover from death? When you lose someone close to you, that grief never fully goes away, but you do learn to cope with it over time. Several effective coping techniques include talking with loved ones about your pain, remembering all of the good in your life, engaging in your favorite activities, and consulting with a grief counselor. Can the time of death be wrong? Even the date and time of the death can be inaccurate simply due to typing in the wrong numbers. For instance, there have been cases where the year and day of the month were swapping, giving a very imprecise time of death. What is time of death? Important in both civil as well as criminal cases, it seems time of death would be a straightforward term that obviously means the exact time a person drew their last breath, shown by law on a death certificate. How do you deal with death? Here are five ideas that may help you cope with when someone you love has died. Join in rituals. Memorial services and funerals are times to gather. Accept your emotions. Don't stop yourself from having a good cry if you feel one coming on. Talk about it when you can. Preserve memories. Get the support you need. What are the four alternatives to death? Synonyms for death: disease, demise, dying, expiration, loss of life, passing, cessation, curtains, more items. 45 synonyms and antonyms for death. What is a fear of dying called? Thanatophobia is an extreme fear of death or the dying process. What happens 40 days after death? The observation of the 40th day after death occurs in the Eastern Orthodox tradition. The ritual represents spiritual intercession on the part of the dead, who are believed to collectively await the day of judgment. How does God feel about death? If we live for the Lord, and if we die for the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or die, we belong to God. What did Jesus say about death? John 11:25-26. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Where did death come from? 20 uplifting Bible verses about death to bring you peace and hope. According to Christianity, death is a consequence of the fall of man from a prior state to innocence, as described in the book of Genesis. Is it normal to think about death? Having some anxiety about death is an entirely normal part of the human condition. However, for some people, thinking about their own death or the process of dying can cause intense anxiety and fear. A person may feel extreme anxiety and fear when they consider that death is inevitable. Is it logical to fear death? If the belief is strongly rational, then it is certainly rational to fear death. However, if the belief is not rational, i.e., it is a belief that is by no means proved but is not substantially inferior epistemically to its rivals, then it is also rational to fear death. What is the afterlife? Fear of death. What is afterlife related OCD? Afterlife OCD involves concerns or fears about what happens to us after we die, whether we have a soul or spirit that lives on in some form after we experience physical death, or whether we simply cease to exist. Who killed God through nihilism? German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, 1844-1900, is sometimes dismissed as a malevolent figure, obsessed with the problem of nihilism and the death of God. What is the paradox about death? Death is a paradox. Death comes to everyone, whereas no one can communicate about death by drawing upon his or her own experience. In that sense, death can be said to be something that is ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. Why nihilism is bad? It is often associated with extreme pessimism and a radical skepticism that condemns existence. A true nihilist would believe in nothing, having no loyalties, and no purpose other than perhaps an impulse to destroy. Why is dying so scary? The reasons why death is scary are often related to the fears of the unknown, of non existence, of eternal punishment, of the loss of control, and fear of what will happen to the people we love. Can you overcome fear of death? If the fear of death overwhelms you, seeking out standard treatments for anxiety, professional help, or learning healthy coping mechanisms can be your ticket to relief and control over these emotions. What does God say about fear of death? Matthew 10:28 And do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Is death natural or unnatural? What is unnatural death? All deaths that can be classified as natural causes are referred to as unnatural deaths. This includes accidents, homicide, suicide, violent death, both intentional and unintentional, falls, poisoning, or overdoses, both deliberate and accidental, and drowning. Is death a part of life? Most religions explain death as a continuation of life in a transformed state, and in a place where there is no longer death but immortality. Is dying a natural part of life? We, the living, which we all are until we take our last breath, owe it to ourselves, our loved ones, and our society to learn about the process of dying. We need to understand that death is a natural part of life. In fact, we need to become as familiar with dying as we have with pregnancy, labor, and birth. Who was the angel of death? On May 24th, 1943, the extermination camp at Auschwitz, Poland, receives a new doctor, 32-year-old Joseph Mengele, a man who will earn the nickname the Angel of Death. Born March 16, 1911, in Bavaria, Mengele, who studied philosophy under Alfred Rosenberg, whose racial theories highly influenced him. Who is biggest god? Shiva is the supreme. In Shaivite traditions, while in Shakti traditions, Adi Parashakti is supreme. Other names such as Ishvara, Bhagavan, Bhagwadi, Parameshvara, and Paramatamana also means Hindu gods, and all of them mainly denote Brahman, who is very powerful god. Trimurti is considered to be the most powerful god as he is a combination of Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. What are three changes after death? The early post-mortem phase is most frequently estimated using the classical triad of post-mortem changes: rigor mortis, livor mortis, and algor mortis. Does the brain change after death? However, a new study published to Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience suggests that your brain may remain active and coordinated during and even after the transition to death, and be programmed to orchestrate the whole ordeal. Can death bring people closer? Mourning can bring people closer together. You're grieving and hurting, and getting closer to other family members might make you feel better and give you hope that your hurt relationship can improve. For some people, when they start to feel better, they get a different mindset. What is the last stage of life? At the end of life period, when body systems shut down and death is imminent, typically lasts from a matter of days to a couple of weeks. Some patients die gently and tranquilly, while others seem to fight the inevitable. What not to do when someone dies? Do not tell their bank. Do not wait to call Social Security. Do not wait to call their pension. Do not tell the utility companies. Do not give away or promise any items to loved ones. Do not sell any of their personal assets. Do not drive their vehicle. More items. Top 10 things not to do when someone dies. What is the most common time of death? According to research, most hospital deaths occur between 3 a.m. and to 4 a.m. This is the time in a day when the body tries to prepare for the activities of the next day while the brain tries to dispose some information to give space to the future happenings of the next day. Is losing a child the worst pain? The few studies that have compared responses to different types of losses have found that the loss of a child is followed by a more intense grief than the death of a spouse or a parent. How long to beat life after death? Main story 3, 1 hour 33 minutes. Main extras 1 hour 57 minutes. Completionist 2, 1 hour 45 minutes. All playstyles 6, 1 hour 41 minutes. What does loss feel like? The grief experience. Following a death or loss, you may feel empty and numb, as if you are in shock. You may notice physical changes such as trembling, nausea, trouble breathing, muscle weakness, dry mouth, or trouble sleeping and eating. Feelings of deep sadness and sorrow are common in grief. Is it okay to think about death every day? Death is a natural part of life. It's normal to think about it from time to time, but it's very common for people experiencing mental illness to think about death more than usual. Thinking about death all the time might feel uncomfortable or scary. Is there pain at the time of death? No, not everyone gets pain in their last weeks, days, or hours of life. Some people have no pain at all. However, we know that many people with a terminal illness do experience pain. For people who are in pain, there are different things that can help, including medication, support, and other practical things. How many times do you avoid death in a lifetime? Conversation. On average, people unknowingly escape death approximately 6 times throughout their life. What happens 72 hours after death? Rigor mortis refers to the state of a body after death in which the muscles become stiff. It commences after around 3 hours, reaching maximum stiffness after 12 hours, and gradually dissipates until approximately 72 hours after death. What happens within 3 days of death? By 3 days, internal organs have decomposed. From 3 to 5 days after death, the body will begin to bloat from gases produced from internal decomposition. The body could actually double in size and turn a greenish color. Extremely unpleasant and long lasting odors called putrefaction begins. What happens after 30 minutes of death? What happens within 3 days of death? The stages of human decomposition. Liver mortis usually sets in 20 to 30 minutes after death and increases in intensity until it becomes fixed at about 12 hours. Assessment of liver mortis can be useful in determining the approximate time of death or cause of death, based on the approximate stage of lividity and the specific coloration. Is death anxiety real? Even though death is inevitable, death anxiety is not uncommon. Many who navigate compulsive disorders, panic disorders, or other phobias can also have death anxiety. General anxiety and depression can also be connected to death anxiety in more debilitating conditions such as agoraphobia or illness anxiety. What happens after someone dies? The hospital will usually issue a medical certificate and formal notice. They will support you with the next steps you need to take. The body will usually be kept in the hospital mortuary until the relatives arrange for a funeral director to take it to their premises or arrange for the body to be taken home. How painful is it to lose someone you love? Losing someone you love is the hardest thing in the world to deal with. It's the kind of pain that you physically feel all over your body. It's suffering of the worst kind. To make things even worse, it seems like no one else understands how you're feeling. What is death types? Losing someone you love is the hardest thing in the world to deal with. How painful is it to lose someone you love? What is death types? The classifications are natural, accident, suicide, homicide, undetermined, and pending. Only medical examiners and coroners may use all of the manners of death, or different ways to view death. Optimistic people may view death as peaceful, content, happy, or hopeful. Pessimistic people may view death as fearful or sad. A higher percentage of pessimistic people choose contentment as the deceased facial expression. This is not a disappointment when considering all of the choices an optimistic person has. Are there two types of death? Quote? Every man has two deaths, when he is buried in the ground and the last time someone says his name. Why not to fear death? Fearing death also makes it harder for us to process grief. A recent study found that those who were afraid of death were more likely to have prolonged symptoms of grief after losing a loved one compared to those who had accepted death. What is the biggest fear of dying? Thanatophobia is not only death anxiety, but can mean an intense fear and feelings of overall dread in relation to one's thinking about death. Does fear of death decrease with age? We get better at this stage as we age. A 2000 meta analysis found that fear of death grows in the first half of life, but by the time we hit the 61 to 87 age group, it recedes to a stable, manageable level. What happens 2 hours after death? In death, chemical bridges gradually form between the actin and the myosin, so the muscles contract and stay that will till the bridges break down. This stiffness, known as rigor mortis, occurs about 2 to 6 hours after death. What happens 8 hours after death? For approximately the first 3 hours after the death, the body will be flaccid, soft, and warm. After about 3 to 8 hours, it starts to stiffen, and from approximately 8 to 36 hours, it will be stiff and cold. The body becomes stiff because of a range of chemical changes in the muscle fibers after death. What happens 7 days after death? 24 to 72 hours after death, the internal organs decompose. 3 to 5 days after death, the body starts to bloat and blood containing foam leaks from the mouth and nose. 8 to 10 days after death, the body turns from green to red as the blood decomposes and the organs in the abdomen accumulate gas. Who went to heaven without dying? Sacred scripture teaches that Enoch and Elijah were assumed into heaven while still alive and not experiencing physical death. What's heaven look like? What did God say before he died? Just before he breathed his last breath, Jesus uttered the phrase, "It is finished." Jesus knew that his mission was now finished, and to fulfill scripture, he said, "I am thirsty." A jar of sour wine was sitting there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put it on a hyssop branch, and held it up to his lips. Where does the soul go after death? The Catholic conception of the afterlife teaches that after the body dies, the soul is judged. The righteous and free of sin enter heaven. However, those who die in unrepented mortal sin go to hell. What is death philosophically? The philosophy of death attempts to determine what it is for people and other living things to die, how and the extent to which death and posthumous events benefit or harm those who die, and the morality of killing. The issues that arise might loosely be classified as metaphysical, prudential, and moral. Who was the first human that died on earth? Day 6, 1 a.m., Garden of Eden. Died c. 9:30 a.m. Venerated in Christianity, Catholic Church, Eastern Orthodox Churches, Oriental Orthodox Churches, Islam, Druze, Baha'i Faith, Mondaism. Feast 24th December. Three more rows. Adam. Is death a male or female? Male. Okay, we're trying to read, but some questions are repeating themselves. Does dying feel like going to sleep? Most people who are dying feel tired. They may want to sleep more often, or for longer periods. They may want to talk less, although some may want to talk more. They may want to eat less or eat different foods since their stomach and digestive system are slowing down. Why is death important in life? If we survive, we grow and mature. At some point, our bodies begin to age more rapidly until our eventual death ends the life cycle. Why do humans fear death? Humans also fear death because they view death as an annihilation of their person, a radical person transformation, a threat to the meaningfulness of life, and a threat to the completion of life projects. Is it normal to think about death? Having some anxiety about death is an entirely normal part of the human condition. However, for some people, thinking about their own death or the process of dying can cause intense anxiety and fear. A person may feel extreme anxiety and fear when they consider that death is inevitable. Can you overcome fear of death? If the fear of death overwhelms you, seeking out standard treatments for anxiety, professional help, or learning healthy coping mechanisms can be your ticket to relief and control over these emotions. Will my fear of death go away? The good news is fear of death fades as a person ages. Men who experience thanatophobia in their 20s usually overcome their fear and are less likely to feel dread towards the subject later on. Women, on the other hand, have a higher chance of experiencing a re-emergence of the problem in their 50s. Did Nietzsche fear nihilism? German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche (1844–1900) is sometimes dismissed as a malevolent figure, obsessed with the problem of nihilism and the death of God. Does the God exist in nihilism? Nihilism states that there is no sustainer, such as God, of lasting purpose, meaning, or hope for human life, even if humans create their own transitory purpose, meaning, or hope. What is death according to Nietzsche? God is dead. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche famously declares in his 1882 work, The Gay Science, God remains dead, and we have killed him. Is death a universal truth? These universal truths include life, death, experience, action, and the will to live. The will to live is a natural phenomenon that exists in nature because all species that exist in nature reproduces and continues to exist through time. Is it okay to be nihilistic? Wait 1 second. I want to see how long I have to go on. There are a lot of questions here. A lot of questions. Uh, there is an end, but I feel like I don't know, 1/5 away from finishing. How do you accept death? There are the These are the ways I've learned to better cope with death. Take your time to mourn. Remember how the person impacted your life. Have a funeral that speaks to their personality. Continue their legacy. Continue to speak to them and about them.